What's up, guys? Golden Knight here. What if what you are calling hatred for your work is, in fact, something completely different, something that no one has properly explained to you yet? Because hatred would be simple. Hatred has a direction, it has a clear target. What most artists feel is far more confusing than that. It is a mixture of expectation, comparison, doubt about who you are within what you do. You keep producing, you keep trying, but that feeling does not go away. And then comes the thought that really hurts. Maybe I am not good enough. Maybe the problem is me. But that thought is also wrong. And when you understand what this problem really is, a lot will change. You will understand why this feeling exists, where it comes from, and what it has been telling you that you still have not known how to hear. And the first point is something that is so close to you that is probably exactly why you have not seen it yet. The distance between what you feel and what you are able to do. The more you develop as an artist, the more references you consume, the more you understand what quality is, the more sophisticated your taste becomes. But your technical skill, your ability to execute, does not grow at the same pace. And then a gap appears. A distance between what you are able to recognize as good and what you are able to produce with your own hands. The problem is that this gap is not visible when you are inside it. You start to question whether you have talent, whether you chose the right path, whether you will ever get where you want to get. When in fact what is happening is a sign of progress, not failure. Think about it this way. A person who has never developed an artistic eye looks at their own work and finds it reasonable, because their standard is still low. You have already moved past that stage. You already know how to recognize when something truly works, when a piece has quality. And precisely because you know that, you are able to clearly see what is missing in your own work. That is the price of having developed a critical eye. What needs to change is the way you interpret this distance. Because as long as you keep reading it as evidence that you are bad, it will paralyze you. When your art becomes a mirror of who you are. At the beginning, you create and evaluate the work as something external, something you made that can be good or bad independently of who you are. But over time, especially when dissatisfaction begins to accumulate, that separation starts to disappear. The work stops being a piece and starts being a reflection of who you are. And when that happens, any flaw in the work stops being a technical flaw and becomes a flaw in you. Now you are no longer evaluating a piece of work. You are evaluating yourself through it. And your brain, which is already naturally inclined to protect your self-esteem, begins to react in ways that seem to be about the work but are not. The procrastination you feel before creating is not laziness, it is protection. If you do not finish, you do not have to face judgment. The difficulty in showing the work to someone is not shyness. It is fear that the person will see you, not what you made. The feeling that it is never ready is not perfectionism, it is a way of postponing the moment when you will have to expose yourself. And the heaviest part of this dynamic is that it creates a cruel paradox. The more you care about what you do, the more the work becomes a mirror. Artists who do not care much about their own development rarely suffer like this. It is exactly the care, the seriousness, the genuine desire to create something incredible that fuels this confusion between work and identity. So you end up being punished precisely for what is most valuable in you as an artist. Getting out of this dynamic is not simple, but it is very possible. Everything begins with a perception. The perception that the work is something you do, not what you are. That a bad piece is not proof of a bad artist, it is proof of an artist in process. That the space between what you created and what you wanted to create says nothing about your worth, it only says where you are right now. And where you are right now is exactly the place from which the next step is taken. Stop trying to create masterpieces. When the goal of each work is to be a masterpiece, the weight you carry before starting is disproportionate to what any creative process can withstand. You are not just creating, you are trying to prove something. And that weight interferes with everything. It interferes with the way you make decisions within the process, because each choice becomes a matter of right or wrong instead of a matter of exploration. It interferes with your willingness to experiment, because experimenting carries the risk of not working, and not working, when the goal is a masterpiece, is failure. It even interferes with your ability to perceive what is working, because the filter is so tight that only what confirms that you have not gotten there yet passes through. Creating with the intention of discovering instead of creating with the intention of getting it right changes the experience of the entire process. You begin to treat each work not as a destination but as an exploration. An exploration with your own limitations, with possibilities that only appear when you are inside the work and not before. And in that exploration, mistakes are not failures, they are information. A direction that did not work is not wasted time, it is the elimination of a path you did not need to take. A work that fell below what you expected is not evidence of limitation, it is a map of what comes next. This way of relating to the process is not lowering the standard of quality. It is a more mature and more accurate understanding of how creative development actually works. And here is the paradox that artists discover when they reach this place. The works that come closest to what they truly wanted to create almost always arise when they stopped trying to make the perfect piece. When the pressure of perfection gets out of the way, decisions become more natural, the process gains a flow that constant vigilance prevented. You stopped fighting against the process itself and started working with it. The comparison you make without realizing you are making it. No one wakes up in the morning and consciously decides to compare themselves to other artists in a destructive way. It is not a deliberate choice. It is something that happens automatically, in the moments when you are scrolling, watching, listening, consuming other people's work. And then, without meaning to, something inside you begins to conspire against you. You see someone's work and feel something that bothers you. And that discomfort, most of the time, is admiration mixed with a question you would rather not be asking. Why can't I do it like that? The problem with this comparison is not that it exists, because comparing is a natural function of the human brain. The problem is the way it is constructed. When you compare your work to someone else's, you are comparing things that are not truly comparable. You see the final result of their work, presented in the best possible way. You do not see the attempts that were discarded, the versions that never left the draft stage. And at the same time, when you look at your own work, you see everything. Every imperfection, every questionable decision, every distance between what came out and what you wanted. The comparison is never between equivalents. It is always between the best of them and the worst of you. There is yet another layer to this problem. You often compare yourself to artists who are at a completely different point from you. Someone who has 10 more years of practice, who has already gone through the same obstacles you are facing now and has already resolved them, who has already made the mistakes you are still going to make and learned from them. And you look at where that person has arrived and use it as a ruler to measure where you are now. It is as if a first-year medical student compared themselves to an experienced surgeon and concluded that there is no way, that they will never get there. The conclusion does not make sense, but the pain it generates is completely real. What needs to happen is not to stop looking at other people's work, because that would waste a huge source of learning and inspiration. What needs to change is what you do with what you see. The difference between using comparison as fuel and using it as judgment is subtle, but it is decisive. Fuel moves you in the direction of something. Judgment paralyzes you in the place where you are. And the question that defines which of the two will happen is simple. When you see a work that impresses you, do you think, I want to understand how this was made, or do you think, I will never be able to do this? The story you tell about who you are as an artist. Every artist carries an internal narrative about themselves. It was formed over time, built from experiences, from comments that lingered, from comparisons that hurt, from works that did not turn out the way you wanted, from moments when someone reacted in a way that marked you. And this narrative, which seems to be merely a description of who you are, actually functions as an instruction. It tells your brain what to expect, what is possible, and where your limits are. The problem is that this narrative is rarely accurate. It is an interpretation built in specific moments, often in moments of vulnerability. Someone once said your work was ordinary, and that comment became a truth. You compared yourself to someone much more advanced and concluded that you did not have what it takes. You tried something new, it did not work immediately, and you recorded that as evidence of limitation. Each of these experiences alone would be just a piece of data. But when the brain consolidates them into a coherent story, they become identity. And identity is much harder to question than an opinion. What makes this even more complicated is that this narrative self-confirms. If you believe that you freeze when you need to create something new, you will freeze. The expectation of freezing generates tension, and tension interferes with the process, and the interference confirms the story. It is a cycle that feeds itself, and that seems like objective evidence when in fact it is a prophecy you are fulfilling without realizing it. The brain is extraordinarily good at finding confirmations for what it already believes, and extraordinarily bad at noticing evidence that contradicts the story it is telling. Questioning this narrative is realizing that the story you tell about yourself as an artist was built with incomplete data, in inappropriate moments, by a version of you who did not yet have the experience you have now, and that you have the right and the responsibility to revise it with more rigor. To ask, is this belief a fact or is it an interpretation? Does it describe who I am, or does it describe who I was in a difficult moment? And if I acted as if it were not absolute truth, what would change in what I do? These questions do not solve everything at once, but they open a crack. And cracks, when you keep them open, let in enough light to change direction. What you call creative block and what it really is. Creative block is one of the most used expressions in the artistic universe and also one of the most misunderstood. When people talk about block, they are usually describing a real experience, the feeling of not being able to create, of sitting in front of the work and not moving forward, of having an empty or stuck mind. But the name we give to an experience shapes the way we face it. And calling it a block suggests that there is an external barrier, something that arrived and closed the path, when most of the time what is happening is completely different and much more specific than that. What is called creative block is almost always one of three things. The first is fear disguised as lack of inspiration. You are not without ideas, you are afraid of what will happen when the ideas are executed. Afraid that the result will not match what you imagined, afraid of exposing yourself. And the brain, which is very efficient at protecting you from discomfort, simply does not allow the process to begin. It generates a fog, a feeling of emptiness, that seems like lack of creativity but is actually a defense mechanism functioning exactly as it was designed to function. The second is exhaustion that was not recognized as exhaustion. Creating requires real cognitive and emotional resources, and these resources renew themselves, but they need time and conditions for that. When you force creation beyond your limits, what appears is not bad work, it is absence of work. The system simply does not have anything to offer because you have not replenished what you spent. And then you interpret this emptiness as block, as a sign that something is wrong with you as an artist, when what is wrong is much simpler. You are exhausted and have not yet stopped to admit it. The third, and perhaps the most common among artists who take their work seriously, is perfectionism operating as paralysis. You have ideas, you have energy, you have the desire to create, but there is an internal filter so strict that nothing passes. Each idea that arises is evaluated before being developed, and the evaluation happens with criteria for a finished work being applied to a simple idea. It is like discarding a seed before planting it because it does not look like a tree. The result is the feeling that there is nothing to work with, when in fact there is a lot, except that everything is being eliminated before it has a chance to exist. Understanding which of these three things is happening to you in a specific moment completely changes what you need to do. Waiting to be ready is the most sophisticated form of procrastination. There is a trap that especially affects the most serious artists, the most committed ones, the ones who truly care about the quality of what they do. It is the trap of believing that there is a state of readiness that needs to be reached before creating. That you need to learn one more technique, master one more concept, resolve that specific insecurity, reach a level of skill a little higher than your current one, and then, from that future point, you will create with more freedom, more confidence, and, above all, quality. This thought seems reasonable. It even seems responsible. But it is one of the most efficient forms of procrastination. The problem is not wanting to develop. The problem is using development as a condition for creation, instead of using creation as a vehicle for development. Because skill does not grow in abstract study, it does not grow in indefinite preparation, it does not grow in passive consumption of references. It grows in real contact with the work, in facing the problems that only appear when you are inside the process, in solving issues that no tutorial will present to you because they are specific to what you are trying to do. Waiting to be ready to create is like waiting to know how to swim before entering the water. It is precisely in the water where learning happens. There is also an issue that needs to be stated here. Many times what is called the search for readiness is, in practice, a negotiation with fear. You are not really waiting to master a technique. You are waiting for fear to decrease enough so that creating feels safe. And fear does not work like that. It does not decrease with preparation, it decreases with exposure. The more you postpone the moment of creating waiting to feel ready, the more fear grows, the more the standard of readiness rises, the further away the moment becomes when you will consider that it is time. It is a cycle that feeds on your own seriousness and your own commitment, which makes it particularly difficult to identify and to break. Readiness is not a prerequisite for creating. It is a consequence of having created. You do not arrive ready at the work. You become more ready through the work. And every time you create without being completely sure, every time you start without having all the answers, every time you enter the process before feeling prepared, you deposit something that will make the next creation a little less frightening. Look at your work with honesty instead of judgment. There is a fundamental difference between looking at your work with honesty and looking at it with judgment, and that difference is not in rigor, because both can be equally rigorous. It is in direction. Judgment looks at the work and asks if it is enough. Honesty looks at the work and asks what it is saying. Judgment compares it to an external standard and measures the distance. Honesty observes what is there and understands what it reveals. And this difference in direction completely changes what you are able to extract from each piece you create. When you look at your work with judgment, the evaluation process ends in a verdict. Good or bad, it worked or it did not work. And verdicts end the conversation before it has given everything it could give. You lose the chance to understand why one part worked, what you did intuitively that is worth preserving in the next works. You also lose the chance to understand precisely what did not work, not in the sense of, this is bad, but in the sense of, this is not doing what I wanted it to do, and now that I see that clearly, what would I need to change? These are questions that only appear when you are observing instead of judging. Staying in observation long enough to extract real information before letting interpretation interfere is one of the most valuable developments an artist can have, because it prevents emotion from destroying the information before you are able to use it rationally. What it means to trust your own process when everything inside you doubts. Trust in the creative process is an expression that is often heard in conversations about art. Trusting the process is a skill. And like every skill, it develops, it is practiced. What it means to trust the process in practice is to accept that you will not know whether what you are doing will work while you are still doing it. That the feeling that it is wrong, that you are lost, that you are not getting anywhere, is part of any serious creative process and not evidence that you should stop. It means continuing to make decisions even without certainty, following an intuition without being able to guarantee that it is right, letting the work evolve in a direction you did not completely plan because something within the process is asking for it. The difficulty of trusting the process comes from an expectation that most people have about how creation should work. There is a fantasy that the skilled artist knows what they are doing at every step, that each decision is made with clarity and intention, that the final result was visible from the beginning. But this is rarely true. What looks like confidence from the outside, that apparent security of an artist who creates without hesitation, is most of the time a deep familiarity with uncertainty. An ability to keep moving even without knowing exactly where to. Not the absence of doubt, but a different relationship with doubt, a relationship in which doubt does not have the power to paralyze because you have already learned that it is a constant companion of the process and not an alarm signal. Developing this trust is work that happens piece by piece, not all at once. Every time you continue when you want to stop, every time you follow an intuition without guarantees, you deposit something into that trust. It grows in an almost imperceptible way, but it grows. And there comes a point when you realize that the relationship with your own process has changed. Stop fighting against who you are. For a long time, possibly for all the time you have spent feeling dissatisfied with your work, there is a tension that you may not have clearly identified. The tension between the artist you are now, with everything that means, with your specific influences, with your current limitations, with your particular way of looking at the world, and the artist you imagine you should be. This imaginary artist is a construction made of references you admire, of standards you internalized, of expectations that came from outside and were adopted as if they were yours. And while you try to create from this imaginary artist instead of from the real artist you are, there is constant friction. A friction that drains energy, that generates dissatisfaction, that makes each work seem like a failed attempt to be something else. Creating from who you really are does not mean stopping developing. It does not mean accepting current limitations as permanent. It means using what you have now as a genuine starting point instead of as a point of shame. It means that your particular voice, formed by everything you have lived, by everything you have consumed, by everything that marked you in ways you cannot always articulate, is not a defect to be corrected. It is the most valuable material you have. And paradoxically, it is exactly when you stop trying to erase it in order to sound like something else that it becomes stronger, more recognizable, more capable of reaching people in a way that no imitation ever could. If this video helped you in any way, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. Thanks so much for watching all the way through. Don't forget to take a look at the description. There are several important links there that can help you even more. See you in the next video.